What was meant to be a routine legal review, quietly tucked away in palace archives, has suddenly sent shockwaves through the monarchy, after palace lawyers examining a decade-old document reportedly uncovered a subtle but unsettling anomaly in the marriage certificate of Camilla and King Charles III. The review, part of a broader effort to modernize and digitize royal records, was never expected to produce headlines, yet somewhere between official seals, legal phrasing, and procedural classifications, something failed to align with statutory requirements in place at the time of the ceremony. The issue is not a dramatic omission or erased signature, but a technical discrepancy concerning how the marriage was recorded, under what legal authority it was certified, and whether that authority fully matched constitutional interpretation. Quiet internal alerts quickly escalated into tense consultations among senior legal advisors, whose unease stemmed from the fact that, within a monarchy, even the smallest technical flaw can carry enormous symbolic and legal weight. Officially, the document was reviewed as part of a scheduled compliance reassessment, but insiders suggest the timing reflects heightened sensitivity around titles, legitimacy, and succession optics as the reign continues to reshape the monarchy's image. The discovery has been tightly contained, classified within a narrow legal circle, yet it has already sparked difficult questions about status, perception, and whether this issue can be resolved quietly or risks reopening long-buried constitutional debates that the palace would rather keep sealed. For now, the public remains unaware and life moves on as usual. But inside the palace, something fundamental has shifted, as a document long regarded as settled history has quietly become an active and unsettling question in a monarchy built on continuity, where uncertainty itself is dangerous. As legal advisors dug deeper, they began to see the anomaly not as a clerical slip, but as a crack in a carefully constructed royal narrative, because the union between King Charles III and Camilla was never simply a private matter of love, but a calculated blend of redemption, image repair, and the preservation of tradition in a modern age. From its controversial beginnings under the shadow of public heartbreak and outrage, the relationship forced the monarchy to walk a tightrope between tradition and reality, making approval of the marriage a constitutional calculation rather than a personal endorsement. Public acceptance had to be engineered through polling, private briefings, and carefully staged appearances, all designed to reframe the story from scandal to stability, from disruption to continuity. Beneath that polished surface, however, legal complexities simmered, particularly around the distinction between civil and religious ceremony, a nuance loaded with constitutional significance that advisors scrutinized intensely to ensure the arrangement could withstand future challenge. Although the marriage went ahead, quiet doubts lingered among traditionalists who questioned symbolism, format, and adherence to centuries-old expectations, concerns that were never loud enough to stop the ceremony, but never fully extinguished either. The pressure to get everything right was immense, as every signature and clause had to project stability after years of institutional strain, leaving no margin for error. When the certificate was finally signed and sealed, it was treated as definitive, yet subtle signals, hesitation in briefings, cautious phrasing in legal notes, suggested certainty may have been more assumed than guaranteed. Those doubts faded with time, buried under governance and routine, until now, as lawyers return to the same document, those forgotten uncertainties feel less like history and more like unfinished business. What once symbolized resilience now hints at vulnerability, and as the past circles back with uncomfortable precision, a troubling truth emerges. Sometimes history does not stay settled, it waits. What now troubles palace lawyers most is a single clause overlooked for years, one that appears not to align cleanly with constitutional expectations, a flaw that is neither dramatic nor obvious. Yet in a monarchy, even the smallest misstep can blur the line between tradition and crisis. The issue emerged quietly during a painstaking re-examination of procedural language that, at first glance, seemed perfectly standard, officially stamped, and long accepted, until legal counsel compared it against the statutory framework in force at the time of the ceremony and noticed a subtle inconsistency. The wording relied on an authorization pathway that, while technically recognized under civil law, may not have fully conformed to precedent governing royal unions, creating something far more unsettling than a violation: ambiguity. Within the monarchy, precedent is not mere tradition, but a stabilizing force meant to eliminate doubt, and every previous royal marriage followed structures designed for unquestioned legitimacy. This clause, however, appeared to rest on an exceptional interpretation, permissible on paper, yet uncertain under the unique constitutional lens applied to King Charles III and Camilla. As questions multiplied about licensing authority, jurisdiction, and whether an exceptional civil provision had been applied at an unprecedented level, advisors began to confront the uncomfortable divide between legality and legitimacy, a distinction that is academic for ordinary citizens, but existential for the Crown. Some argue the flaw is symbolic and could be quietly clarified, while others fear it opens the door to renewed scrutiny of a marriage once thought settled, even raising chilling questions about retroactive correction and the stability of titles derived from the union. Though such challenges may hold little legal weight, the optics alone could ignite controversy, and as debate intensifies behind closed doors, one truth is clear. This clause is no longer just ink on paper, but a fragile thread that, if pulled carelessly, could unravel far more than anyone anticipates. That if the certificate is indeed compromised, the consequences extend far beyond paperwork, touching titles, status, legitimacy, and even succession optics. Because while insiders insist this is a narrow legal nuance, history has shown that nuance can ignite scandal faster than truth can restrain it. The first shockwave would move through the position of Camilla, whose role as Queen Consort is defined not only by ceremony, but by the lawful union to King Charles III, meaning that even the faintest doubt about the legal framework behind that marriage could reopen questions the palace believed were long buried. These would not necessarily be questions powerful enough to topple the crown, but sharp enough to wound it, because in a monarchy perception shapes reality, and perception rarely waits for legal clarification. Critics who never fully embraced the marriage would seize on the discovery, reframing technical ambiguity as doubt about legitimacy and process, and even implying that rules were bent to accommodate personal desire, a narrative that could spread regardless of constitutional substance. Behind closed doors, constitutional scholars are already weighing precedent against symbolism, debating whether the issue could be quietly clarified, whether parliamentary involvement would be required, or whether historical continuity could neutralize controversy, each option carrying reputational cost in an institution that survives on public trust. International media would amplify speculation at speed, turning an internal legal review into a global debate about transparency and hereditary power. While within the royal family, the emotional toll would be heavy, threatening years of careful image rehabilitation tied to this union. More unsettling still is what the discovery implies internally, that someone may have seen the flaw before, signed off on it, and allowed it to pass, triggering sudden silence, shortened meetings, and urgent consultations inside the king's private office, where legal advisors argued ambiguity did not equal invalidity, while senior strategists calculated headlines, parliamentary reaction, and the volatility of public opinion. At the heart of it all lies a deeper fear, not just of a flawed clause, but of what correcting it might unleash, because once uncertainty enters a monarchy built on continuity, it rarely stays contained. Beneath the legal arguments lies something more personal: fear of blame. The monarchy prides itself on procedural perfection, a system designed to eliminate doubt through relentless vetting. And if a flaw managed to survive that process, it means someone somewhere approved language that was less than airtight. No one asks it aloud, but the questions linger uncomfortably in the air: who authorized it, who reviewed it, and why it went unchallenged at the time, especially when legal experts had already examined the document and publicly reinforced confidence in its validity. That past certainty now feels fragile, raising the unsettling possibility that urgency, emotional context, or reliance on interpretation may have overshadowed absolute clarity. For King Charles III, the strain is not just institutional but deeply personal, because this marriage was the culmination of years of perseverance against public resistance, and seeing it pulled back under scrutiny reopens battles he believed were long resolved. Advisors described not panic, but a quiet intensity and a steely determination to protect Camilla and the integrity of the crown, even as the weight of legacy presses heavily, knowing how fragile it can be. As consultations stretch late into private corridors, another race unfolds against leaks, with briefings tightly restricted and instructions carefully issued. Yet the palace understands that secrets pulse louder the more tightly they are held. Once whispers escape, the story will no longer belong to controlled legal circles, but to a public narrative where nuance is sacrificed for drama, accelerated by tabloids, social media, political commentary, and historical comparisons that magnify doubt faster than clarification can follow. The palace faces a brutal communications dilemma: speak too soon and risk amplifying uncertainty. Wait too long and invite accusations of concealment, because in the digital age, narrative control is fragile and reputational erosion can be harder to repair than any statutory wording. And behind all the strategy and speculation lies a stark, personal irony. For Charles, this is not just paperwork, but a relationship decades in the making, a love defended through years of scrutiny, now once again exposed to the unforgiving court of public opinion that he once believed that patience and dedication would transform controversy into acceptance. And for a time they did, as public sentiment softened, the narrative stabilized, and the crown moved forward, yet that hard-won stability now feels fragile as the discovery of a technical flaw threatens to reopen chapters he thought were closed. For King Charles III, it is not legality alone that weighs on him, but symbolism, the risk that critics could once again question the foundation of the union he defended so fiercely, forcing him back onto a battlefield he knows all too well, only now bearing responsibility, not just as a husband, but as sovereign. Protecting Camilla has always been central to his resolve, as he understands the scrutiny she has endured and the patience she has shown, and the thought of her title or legitimacy being publicly dissected again is deeply personal rather than merely political. Yet protection within a monarchy is never simple, because every move can appear calculated and every silence strategic, and beyond personal loyalty lies constitutional duty, leaving him unable to respond purely as a husband when every decision must safeguard institutional stability. Advisors urge restraint, warning that premature action could magnify speculation. But restraint does not lighten the emotional burden, especially for a king who waited decades to ascend the throne and envisioned a reign defined by continuity and careful modernization. The fear that his legacy could be reshaped not by reform or diplomacy, but by revived controversy feels profoundly unjust. Yet history records perception as readily as fact, and Charles knows that monarchs are remembered as much for the shadows that follow them as for their resilience. Now he stands at an emotional crossroads, balancing devotion with duty and loyalty with leadership, aware that each path forward carries consequences that will echo beyond the present moment. While one unsettling question lingers: can the monarchy absorb another shock, knowing that while it has survived wars, abdications, and scandal, survival has always come at the cost of scars? History offers both comfort and warning, reminding the crown that it has weathered legal storms before, moments when personal decisions collided with constitutional expectation, forcing adaptation that preserved continuity, but never without cost, as trust was shaken and rebuilt slowly and deliberately. What makes this moment different is not its scale, but its symbolism, because the modern monarchy rests less on mystique and more on public consent, on the belief that every step is structured and every decision grounded in clarity, and even minor ambiguity in something as foundational as a royal marriage risks rippling outward into doubts about reliability itself. In the past, the palace relied on narrative control through calm statements and carefully chosen language, but in an age of instant speculation, silence can breed suspicion while explanation can fuel escalation, leaving strategy precariously balanced. Behind closed doors, advisors weigh discreet remedies against controlled transparency, knowing that quiet clarification could appear evasive if discovered, while openness could amplify scrutiny at a moment when stability is vital. For King Charles III, the choice carries extraordinary psychological weight, because his reign is still defining itself, and every decision now shapes how history will remember it, as resilience or vulnerability. Legal counsel has confirmed the flaw does not automatically invalidate the marriage, yet they cannot control how critics might interpret it, and in the court of public opinion the line between technical imperfection and constitutional crisis is perilously thin. As divisions sharpen within advisory circles, the debate shifts from legality to narrative, from statute to belief, because the monarchy's authority ultimately depends on public trust. Trust that tradition is honored, procedure respected, and the crown positioned above ambiguity. Charles understands that once action is taken it cannot be undone, and that even discretion offers no guarantee of containment, because leaks surface, archives resurface, and interpretation evolves. The flaw now exists in awareness and cannot be unseen, forcing a decision suspended between protection and principle, as time moves forward with or without clarity. In the end, this is no longer merely about correcting language in a document, but about defining leadership under pressure, because once a crack appears in the crown, it subtly but permanently alters what follows.